Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill is on the table now. The discussions, the negotiations are happening as we speak, and the impacts of this bill would be massive. Let's dig in on what that might look like. For those that don't know me, my name is Nick D'Angelo with Saint Investment Group. We specialize in real estate funds and pay up to 14.28% annually. Let's take a look at this big, beautiful bill. Before we get into the bill, let's set the table on what's going on leading up to this. First off, in the United States, we have roughly 37 trillion in national debt as it stands today. Second, we have a deficit in our budget of around 2 trillion per year. Now, this is under Donald Trump. He's a handful of months in office. This is also under Biden. This is also under Trump previously. So this is a both sides of the aisle issue that we've been dealing with. It's only been getting worse for several decades. So it's not partisan. This is an overspending of government across the board in the US. That said, one of the most interesting things that we've seen in the last couple of years that I personally have had a huge eye on was Doge. Let's talk about that for a second. So Doge was the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon Musk was going to head up and lean into with the number one goal of reducing government spending. This was interesting. The numbers behind this were targeting 2 trillion per year in budget reduction. For those keeping math at home, for those taking score at home, that would balance our budget within 1 year of Doge efforts. Now, that was Elon's initial target. Where Elon landed after dealing with some new issues was he said, well, maybe not 2 trillion, maybe I can deliver 1 trillion in budget reduction and budget in reducing that deficit from 2 trillion to 1 trillion. Still, that would have been massive. The issues that Elon ran into were the following. The first is that Elon went the route of reducing government employee count. He was going to gut departments. He was going to reduce the headcount of government agencies dramatically. The issue that Elon found was that government agencies, their congressional bills and congressional budgets that are assigned to those departments. So Elon, in order to achieve that, would have been going directly against what our Congress had mandated. Doesn't fly. So he ran into an immediate wall there. So wall after wall after wall, what Elon eventually landed on was roughly 150 billion in savings, depending on some of the calculations you look at. Significantly less than the 2 trillion reduction initially that would have made him a Hall of Fame American, no question. That's what we're going into today with the big, beautiful bill. Now, we're looking at the big, beautiful bill. It has huge implications for our tax code. It has huge implications for refunding different initiatives. And the problem that I specifically have with it is it also increases the deficit. The estimate of the deficit that would be created by the big, beautiful bill is roughly somewhere around $500 billion a year. Okay, there are several different ways to break this down, but most groups target about $500 billion a year that it would add to the deficit of the US every year. Meaning we're already at 2 trillion right now per year. So we're at 37 trillion for our total debt. We're adding 2 trillion a year to that. That's a massive number and that has major impacts. If we add an additional $500 billion a year, then we just increased our deficit by 25% with one bill. Now, a bigger issue, and you've heard Trump attacking Jerome Powell, saying he needs to drop rates, he needs to drop rates, he needs to drop rates. Now, people that are short-sighted might say that that is solely because Trump wants to increase real estate values or increase the market, et cetera, et cetera. There's probably some degree of truth to that. But the reality is we also, part of our 37 trillion in national debt today, we also have roughly a third of that 37 trillion that's going to have to be refinanced in the next short period of time. Meaning we have 11 or 12 trillion or so that is going to increase in rates, part of that refinancing. So the net, if you break down many different angles of our national debt impact and our national deficit annually, that impact, we might increase the annual deficit by $1 trillion. That's a 50% increase. This is massive. This does have repercussions. And this is not isolated to a Trump issue. Again, we have several decades of the same type of policy making that keeps adding to the deficit year after year, which eventually just adds to our national debt. Now, with that table set, let's jump into the big, beautiful bill details. So I have some notes in front of me. We just put this together. So I'm just going to read it off for you guys so you can see the highlights here. 1, permanent extension of the 2017 TCJA cuts. 2, increasing the standard deduction for seniors to eliminate tax on Social Security benefits. Another is eliminating tax on tips. That was a promise that Trump made very early on, and he's including it in the big, beautiful bill. Also, increasing the child tax credit to $2,500 per child. I personally think this is extremely strategic. I think this is extremely important, and I think it's forward thinking for the country, because one thing we do know is that we are not having enough children in the US. Our demographics are at risk if we don't support and invest in future generations. It's the same thing that I feel with the debt. We need to eliminate debt, eliminate the deficit, because future generations are going to be paying for this. So we also need those future generations to exist. So I'm always for pro-family initiatives, things that increase family size, that support families having more kids, because it supports the future of our country. Also, the bill includes temporarily increasing the standard deduction for most filers. Then there's raising the cap on SALT deductions. There's adding work requirements for SNAP and Medicaid, and shifting more costs to the states in relation to those programs. Now, this is a touchy one on both sides of the aisle, and there's a lot of pushback. I conceptually agree with the fact that there should be work requirements with some government assistance. I think that people should be contributing to the economy. Generally speaking, there are one-off or unique circumstances where that might not apply. But generally speaking, if people want government support, I think they need to be contributing. I think they need to be having jobs and supporting our country while they're also receiving from the country. Adding a tax deduction for interest on car loans for US-made vehicles. This goes back to manufacturing in the US and how both sides of the aisle are looking to support US manufacturing. You saw Biden with the CHIPS Act, whether you agree with every piece of that or not, the interest was bringing manufacturing back to the US. And you've seen Trump constantly talk about this, supporting manufacturing on the US. So I understand the train of thought here. And the last thing we'll talk about is that they are planning to extend the Opportunity Zone program with changes to target rural distressed communities. Okay, let's talk tax code strategy for a second. Many of the things that are touted as, or tax handouts for the rich, many of these are created to incentivize dollars to do things that the government wants them to do, okay? This is the basis of Opportunity Zone legislation. The goal is that there are benefits to investing in areas with private dollars that could benefit by completely revitalizing the area, improving development, improving housing, etc. So no shock here, and this particular item should get support on both sides if we're not trying to attack the rich and instead trying to benefit the poor, which is the goal of Opportunity Zone tax strategy. So will this bill actually pass? The reality is that the margin for error here is extremely tight. In order for this to pass, 50 out of 53 Republicans would have to vote in favor of the bill. That's the bare minimum, because that would allow Vice President Vance to cast the tiebreaker vote and get this bill passed. Now, that sounds good in theory, but more than 3 Republicans have already expressed some dissatisfaction with different points in the bill. The highlights of what Republicans are pushing back on would include specifically the treatment of Medicaid, concerns about the phase out of clean energy tax credits, and some wanting even deeper tax cuts across the board. So will this pass? It's yet to be seen. But here's what we know with absolute certainty. If this does pass, then there are some huge benefits here. It incentivizes many positive things. It pushes people in directions that should be good, and it will likely put more money in the pockets of each income demographic, although maybe not the same percentage of each income bracket. The problem here is that we're dealing with what we've dealt with for 20 plus years, which is that it will add to the deficit of the budget. That, coupled with the fact that we need to refinance over 10 trillion of our debt to a higher interest rate, and that will cost us more, this is going to be looking like a very expensive addition to the deficit. The last note I'll make here is this. While the deficit is big, while this is something that has not been cured for decades, the reality is in order to achieve a reduction in the deficit, the biggest spending items would require deep cuts. Those would include Medicaid, Medicare. Those would include Social Security. Those would include defense. If we cut huge pieces of those, that 2 trillion, maybe 3 trillion deficit being reduced dramatically is possible. But the reality is that voters on both sides of the aisle are unlikely to ever get on board for those types of cuts. All right, guys, we're going to stay close to the big, beautiful bill. We will keep in touch with you on what we're seeing, what the impacts will be on that. And if you ever want to learn more about what we're seeing in the economy, we do live webinars monthly. You can find those and the replays at saintinvestment.com/resources. See you guys soon.